Get out before you embarrass us, Preston sneered, blocking the revolving doors of the city's most exclusive hotel. He waved his platinum card at the security team, demanding they remove the trash. That trash was me. His wife, my own sister, giggled behind him, filming my humiliation for her social media. They thought they were gatekeeping paradise from a poor relation. They had no idea that the security team was actually waiting for my signal, or that the signature on the deed to this entire skyscraper, ink barely dry, was mine. Before I destroy their ego in front of the entire city, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who should love you most. My name is Brianna, and at 32 years old I have learned that blood might be thicker than water, but money is the only thing that commands respect in my family. The biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped against my face as I stepped out of the dented Toyota Camry, the Uber driver. A kind older man named Samuel apologized 3 times for the heater not working, but I tipped him $50 anyway. I did not mind the cold. It was the chill awaiting me inside that I was preparing for. Towering above me was the Azure Summit. It was not just a hotel. It was a cathedral of wealth, gold-leafed columns, limestone facade, and a revolving door that separated the elite from the invisible. To most, it was a fortress of exclusion. To me, as of 9 this morning, it was an asset in my portfolio. But tonight, I was not wearing my CEO hat. I was wearing the mask they expected. The struggling big sister. The disappointment. I adjusted my blazer. It was a simple charcoal piece, bespoke Italian silk, but understated enough to look like department store clearance to an untrained eye. As I reached for the brass handle of the entrance, a shadow loomed over me. It was Preston, my brother-in-law. At 6'2" with a jawline he paid a surgeon for, Preston wore his arrogance like cologne too, strong and entirely artificial. He did not step aside. He stepped in front, using his broad shoulders to physically wall me off from the warmth of the lobby. "Well, look who decided to show up," he announced, his voice booming loud enough for the valet parking attendants to hear. "I thought you would be taking the bus." Brianna. "Hello, Preston," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My father is expecting me." I tried to sidestep him, but he mirrored my movement, blocking me again. A smirk played on his lips. "Not dressed like that, he isn't." He looked me up and down with theatrical disgust lingering on my comfortable loafers. "Read the sign. Brianna, it says. Formal attire, not assistant manager at a discount outlet. This is the Azure Summit. They have standards here. Standards that keep people like you on the sidewalk." He chuckled, a wet, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. "Honestly, Brie, I am doing you a favor. A bottle of water in there costs more than your entire outfit." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from the sheer audacity. "Preston?" I said, dropping the pleasantries. "Do not make a scene. It is Dad's 65th birthday. I am going inside." I stepped forward, my hand brushing his expensive, ill-fitting suit jacket. He recoiled as if I were contagious. "Don't touch the merchandise," he snapped, dusting off his lapel. "Listen to me. I have important investors coming tonight, real money. I cannot have you hovering around the buffet table looking like a charity case. It ruins the aesthetic." He turned his head, snapping his fingers at the large stone-faced doorman standing just inside the glass. "Hey, you security, we have a loiterer out here. Keep the trash on the curb, will you?" Through the glass, I saw the head of security, Mr. Henderson. His eyes widened as he saw me. He started to rush forward, his hand going to his earpiece, ready to open the door for his new boss. I locked eyes with him and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. I wanted to see how far Preston would go. I wanted every insult recorded in my memory. I stood my ground on the freezing pavement, the snow beginning to fall on my shoulders. "You are going to regret this, Preston," I said softly. He laughed, checking his Rolex. The only thing I regret is letting my wife invite you. Now shoo. Go find a diner. I will send you a picture of the cake. Just as the humiliation began to attract the attention of guests exiting their limousines, the revolving door spun open. It wasn't security coming to remove me. It was my mother, Patrice. She stepped out wrapped in a fur coat that I knew she had rented for the evening. She looked at Preston, then at me. Her eyes didn't hold warmth or concern. They held annoyance. "Mom, tell your husband to move," I said, hoping for a shred of maternal instinct. She sighed, tightening her grip on her designer clutch. "Brianna, why must you always be difficult? Preston has paid a fortune for this evening. He wants everything perfect. You know how hard he works for this family." Unlike some people, the betrayal stung worse than the wind. Unlike some people, that was the narrative they loved. The story was that Preston was the financial genius, the savior, while I was the drifting failure, simply because I didn't flash cash or drive a leased Mercedes. "Mom, I am not leaving. I have a gift for Dad," I said, reaching into my bag. My mother scoffed. "A gift? What is it? Another homemade card, or maybe a coupon book. We are eating at a 5-star restaurant. Brianna, not a soup kitchen. Please spare us the embarrassment. Go home. We will bring you some leftovers." She turned her back on me, taking Preston's arm. "Come along, darling. Don't let her ruin your mood for the investors." Preston threw one last victorious look over his shoulder. "See, even your mother knows you don't belong here. Stay out here with the valet drivers, that is more your speed." They pushed through the revolving doors, laughing, leaving me standing alone in the falling snow. The doorman, Mr. Henderson, looked at me through the glass, conflict written all over his face. He knew who I was. He knew I could fire everyone in that building with a single text, but I just smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. I adjusted my coat and walked toward the door, pushing it open. Not because they invited me, but because I owned the lock, the key, and the ground they were standing on. Tonight was not just a birthday dinner, it was going to be a lesson in humility, and tuition was going to be very expensive. The biting wind off Lake Michigan was nothing compared to the chill that descended when the black limousine pulled up to the curb. My heart jumped as the rear door opened, revealing the only reason I had subjected myself to this torture. My father, Elijah, stepped out onto the pavement, looking smaller than I remembered. His shoulders, usually strong from 40 years of carrying mail bags for the United States Postal Service, were hunched forward inside a suit that was clearly 20 years old. It was the charcoal gray one he wore to church every Easter, slightly loose around the neck now that he had lost. "Wait!" I took a step forward, the instinct to run to him, overwhelming every other defense mechanism I had built up. "Dad?" I called out, my voice cracking just slightly. His face lit up when he saw me. The weary lines around his eyes softened, and for a split second the imposing facade of the Azure summit melted away. He reached out his arms, ignoring the valet waiting to take his coat. "Brianna, baby girl, you made it." He started to move toward me, his steps eager, clumsy with affection. He wanted to hug me. He wanted to bridge the gap that his wife and other daughter had spent years widening, but he never made it to me. Before his hand could touch mine, a manicured claw clamped down on his forearm, dragging him back with surprising strength. It was my mother, Patrice. She emerged from the limousine like a queen stepping off a throne, though her kingdom was built entirely on debt and delusion. She was draped in a white fur coat that I knew for a fact was rented because she had asked to borrow $50 from me last week for the deposit. Her hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet of curls, and her face was plastered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile reserved for the public. "Elijah." "Stop making a scene," Patrice hissed through her teeth, her voice low and venomous, barely audible over the wind, but loud enough to freeze my father in his tracks. She yanked him back toward the hotel entrance, positioning him like a prop behind her. Then she turned her gaze on me. The warmth I had felt from my father evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold appraisal of a woman who measured love in dollar signs. I expected her to turn on Preston. I expected her to see her son-in-law blocking the entrance, physically, intimidating her daughter and say something, anything, to defend me. But that was a fantasy. From a childhood, I never had. Patrice did not look at Preston with anger. She looked at him with admiration. She saw the expensive suit, the platinum card in his hand, the arrogance of a man who claimed to own the world. And then she looked at me standing in my practical loafers and sensible blazer and she sneered. Brianna, she sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. Why must you always be so difficult? We are 5 minutes late and here you are causing a disturbance on the sidewalk. Look at you. You look like you just came from a shift at the library. This is a 6-star establishment. Do you have any idea how much Preston paid for this evening? I felt the familiar sting of injustice prick at my eyes. Not tears, but anger bubbling up like magma. Mom. Preston is blocking the door, I said, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. He is refusing to let me in to celebrate Dad's birthday. Patrice waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. Well, can you blame him? He is trying to protect the family image. Look at this place, Brianna. Look at the clientele. She gestured vaguely at a couple walking past wearing diamonds that caught the streetlights. Preston has invited very important investors. Tonight, people who matter. If they see you looking like this, it reflects poorly on him. It reflects poorly on all of us. You are being selfish, selfish. The word hung in the air, heavy and absurd. I was the one who paid the electric bill when Dad's pension check was late. I was the one who drove Mom to her physical therapy appointments when Dominique was too busy taking photos of her brunch. But in Patrice's world, none of that mattered, because I didn't have the flash. I didn't have the fake wealth that Preston projected. Just go home, Brianna, Patrice said, turning away, adjusting her rented fur. She pulled a $20 bill from her clutch and tried to press it into my hand. Here, go. Buy yourself some takeout. We will tell Dad you got stuck at work. He will forget by the time the appetizers arrive. Don't ruin this night for your sister and her husband. They have worked too hard. I looked at the crumpled bill in her hand, a symbol of exactly what she thought I was worth. Then I looked past her shoulder at my father. Elijah was standing by the revolving door, his head bowed. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had spent his life walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace in a house fueled by narcissism. He caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, begging me silently not to cause a fight, begging me to just endure it for his sake. If I left now, I could go back to my penthouse. I could order room service, open a bottle of real vintage wine, and forget these people existed. But leaving meant abandoning him. It meant leaving him alone at a table where he would be ignored, mocked, and silenced. It meant letting Preston and Patrice rewrite the narrative of his life, making him feel small on the one day that was supposed to be about him. I am not going anywhere, Mom, I said, pushing her hand away and letting the $20 bill fall to the snowy pavement. I pulled my shoulders back, standing to my full height. I don't care about Preston's investors. And I certainly don't care about your image. I am here for Dad, and unless you plan to physically drag me away, I am walking through those doors. Patrice gasped, clutching her pearls as if I had slapped her. You ungrateful little, she began. But her tirade was cut short by the arrival of the final member of this toxic circus. A bright flash blinded me, followed by the click of a shutter. Dominique, my younger sister and the family's golden child, pirouetted out of the revolving door. Phone held high, capturing the perfect angle of her professionally contoured face. She was wearing a sequined dress that cost more than my first car. A dress bought with credit cards that were maxed out 3 times over. She didn't look at Dad. She didn't look at the hotel. She looked only at herself in the screen of her phone. What is with all the shouting, guys? Dominique chirped, not looking up from her screen. I am trying to do a live stream for my followers. The lighting out here is tragic. She finally lowered the phone and pretended to notice me for the first time. Oh hey Brianna, didn't see you. They're camouflage vibes, right? Dominique, tell your sister to go home. Mom snapped. The staff will think we are bringing the help in through the front door. Dominique laughed, a tinkling hollow sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, relax, Mom, seriously. Let her in. She walked over to Preston, wrapping her arm around his waist and resting her head on his shoulder, looking at me with pity, masked as kindness. Actually, it is good content for my brand. The contrast, you know, we can say we are doing a charity thing, helping the less fortunate experience the high life, just for one night. It makes us look generous. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with malice. Come on, Bree. We will ask the waiter to pull up an extra chair. Maybe they have a stool or something in the back. You can sit in the corner and watch how real business is done. Just try not to chew too loudly. Okay. The acoustics in there are sensitive. Preston snorted, finally stepping aside but keeping his arm barred across the entrance until the last second. Fine, he grunted. If you want to play charity case, be my guest. But if security throws you out for violating the dress code, don't expect me to save you. He looked at my father. All right. Elijah, let's go inside. I ordered the good scotch. Try to act like you have tasted it before. My father didn't say a word. He just kept his head down and shuffled through the door, following the man who insulted him and the woman who enabled it. I watched them go. 3 people playing dress-up in a castle made of sand. I took a deep breath, inhaling the freezing air to steady my racing heart. I adjusted my blazer, feeling the silk lining against my skin, a secret reminder of who I really was. They thought they were letting a beggar into their banquet. They had no idea they were opening the gates to the landlord. I stepped into the revolving door, pushing the glass forward, stepping out of the cold and into the lobby of the hotel that bore my name in the deed hidden in my purse. The game had officially begun. The walk from the lobby to the private dining room was a procession of unearned arrogance, led by Preston, who strutted across the marble floors as if he had personally laid every stone. The azure summit was designed to intimidate with its vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadows and chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears. To anyone else, this walk was a display of wealth. But to me it was a walk through my own ledger. I knew the cost of the imported Italian tile beneath our feet. I knew the monthly maintenance fee for the indoor waterfall that my mother paused to admire, loudly clutching her rented purse like a shield. But what amused me most was the reaction of the staff. As we passed the concierge desk, a row of uniformed employees snapped to attention. Their spines straightened and their heads bowed in a synchronized display of respect that you only see in establishments of this caliber. Preston naturally assumed this deference was for him. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his tie and offering a benevolent nod to a young bellman, essentially blessing the boy with his presence. He did not notice that the bellman's eyes were not locked on him but on me. He did not notice the slight widening of the concierge's eyes or the way the shift manager froze mid-sentence on the phone before hurriedly hanging up to smooth his jacket. They knew exactly who was walking through their lobby. The memo had gone out this morning with my photo attached. Subject: new owner, do not disturb. But Preston, in his infinite narcissism, saw only what he wanted to see. A world that bent the knee to his rented suit. We arrived at the entrance of the Lakeview Room, the most exclusive table in the entire building. It was a semi-private alcove surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline glittering against the black expanse of Lake Michigan. The table was set for a king gleaming with silver cutlery that caught the candlelight and crystal stemware that looked fragile enough to shatter from a loud voice. But as we approached the table, I noticed the math did not add up. There were 5 of us. My parents, Preston, Dominique, and myself. But there were only 4. High-backed velvet chairs arranged around the white tablecloth. Preston marched to the head of the table, pulling out a chair for himself and gesturing for Dominique to take the seat to his right. My mother immediately claimed the seat to his left, placing her clutch on the table to mark her territory. My father. Elijah stood awkwardly, his hand resting on the back of the fourth chair, looking between me and the empty space where a fifth seat should have been. The silence that followed was heavy and calculated. "Oh, would you look at that?" Preston said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "It seems the reservation system made a tiny error. They must have assumed a party of 4. He looked at me with a grin that showed too many teeth. "I suppose they didn't think someone like you would actually make it past security." "Brianna." I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me. The table was large enough for 6 chairs. The absence of the fifth wasn't a mistake by the restaurant. It was a specific instruction given by the host. I looked at the waiter, a young man named Marcus, whom I had hired myself 3 months ago during a site visit. Marcus looked terrified, holding a tray of water glasses, his eyes darting between me and Preston. He knew better than to make a mistake on a VIP table, but he was clearly following orders that confused him. "Excuse me, waiter," Preston snapped, snapping his fingers in Marcus's face. "We need another seat for my sister-in-law. But don't bother bringing another one of these velvet armchairs. They take up too much space and frankly, they are for paying guests. Just grab one of those metal folding chairs from the service station. You know, the ones you use for the staff meetings?" Dominique covered her mouth to hide a giggle, bringing her phone up to record the interaction. "Oh, that is that. Perfect, actually," she chimed in. "It fits her aesthetic shabby chic. Right, Mom?" My mother, Patrice, busied herself with her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. "Just get the chair and sit down." "Brianna." "Stop." Standing there, making the waiter uncomfortable. "We have a schedule to keep." Marcus looked at me, panic rising in his chest. He knew that bringing a folding chair to the owner of the hotel was a career-ending move, possibly a life-ending move in the corporate world. I gave him a microscopic nod, a silent permission to play along. Do it, Marcus, I thought. Let him dig his grave a few feet deeper. "Right away, sir," Marcus stammered, retreating into the kitchen shadows. The minute waiting for the chair was excruciating. My father refused to sit down, gripping the back of his velvet chair until his knuckles turned white. Preston, however, was enjoying every second. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide, expanding into the space, creating a physical barrier of ego. "You see, Brianna," he said, lecturing me as if I were a child. "There is a natural order to things. In the animal kingdom, the alphas eat first and they sit on the high ground. You have spent your whole life being passive, and passive people get the folding chair. It is a life lesson, really. I am doing this to motivate you." The waiter returned, his face flushed, carrying a beige metal folding chair, the kind with chipped paint on the legs used for overflow seating in high school gymnasiums. The sound it made as he unfolded it was a harsh metallic clank that echoed against the crystal and fine china. It was lower, significantly lower than the plush velvet armchairs. When I sat down, I sank even further, the cheap metal digging into my back. My chin was barely level with the table rim while everyone else towered over me. "This is ridiculous, my father," Elijah suddenly said, his voice trembling with a rare flash of anger. He stood up, pushing his velvet chair back. "I am not having this. Take my chair, Brianna. I will sit on the metal one. I don't care about the velvet." "Sit down, Elijah," my mother hissed, grabbing his sleeve vigorously. "You are the birthday boy. You are not sitting on a metal chair like a pauper. It insults Preston's hospitality." "No, Dad," I said, my voice calm, slicing through the tension like a blade. I looked up at my father, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Sit down. I am perfectly comfortable right here. This vantage point gives me a very interesting perspective on things." Preston laughed, a loud barking sound that made the couple at the next table flinch. "See, Elijah. She knows her place. She is comfortable looking up at us. That is where she belongs. Now, waiter, pour the water and make sure hers is tap water. No need to waste the sparkling on someone who can't tell the difference." I watched my father slowly sink back into his seat, defeat etched into the lines of his face. He looked at me with profound sorrow, apologizing silently for his inability to protect me from his own family. But I didn't feel small sitting on that cold, hard metal chair, purely because Preston wanted me to feel small. Instead, I felt like a judge, sitting on a bench watching a criminal confess to his crimes without realizing the stenographer was typing every word. I took a sip of the tap water, observing the way Dominique preened for her camera and the way Preston swirled his empty glass like a tycoon from a bad movie. They thought the folding chair was my punishment. In reality, it was the front row seat to their destruction, and I was ready for the next act. The leather-bound menu landed on the white tablecloth with a heavy thud, a sound that usually signaled endless possibilities to the hungry elite. But tonight, it sounded more like a judge's gavel. I opened the heavy cover, running my fingers over the embossed gold lettering. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, and smelled faintly of vanilla and money. My eyes scanned the prices automatically, purely out of habit. Even though I owned the place and could technically eat here for free for the rest of my life, the numbers were still staggering. The cheapest appetizer, a roasted beet salad with goat cheese foam, was $80. The Wagyu steak my brother-in-law had been bragging about earlier was listed at $400 purely for the cut without any sides. It was a menu designed to make people feel important, simply by being able to read it without flinching. Before I could even process the entree options, I felt a sharp tap on my elbow. It was my mother, Patrice, leaning in close, her perfume overpowering the delicate scent of the fresh lilies on the table. She didn't look at the menu. She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed into slits of warning. "Brianna, listen to me." She whispered, her voice a low hiss that only I could hear. "Do not even think about ordering from the right side of the page. You are getting the soup, the clear broth, not the bisque, and water. Tap water. We are not racking up a bill just because you decided to crash a party you were not invited to. Preston is being generous enough, letting you sit here. Do not make him regret it." I looked at her, seeing the genuine anxiety in her eyes. She wasn't worried about Preston's bank account, she was worried about his mood. She had spent her entire life managing the emotions of men she deemed powerful, and now she was managing me to keep the peace. I looked past her to my father, Elijah, who was staring at his menu with wide, terrified eyes. He looked like he was afraid to touch it, lest he be charged a rental fee for the leather. "Dad, get whatever you want," I said softly. He just shook his head, muttering that he wasn't very hungry. Preston overheard us. Of course he did. He had ears like a hawk when it came to his money. He lowered his own menu, a smirk playing on his lips as he swirled his scotch. "Oh, let her order, Patrice," he said, waving his hand magnanimously. "Let the girl eat. It is not every day she gets to see what real food looks like." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Go ahead, Brianna. Get the chicken, or maybe the pasta. Just do yourself a favor and stay away from the items with French names. I would hate for you to embarrass yourself trying to pronounce confit or gratin. The waiters here are professionals, but even they have a breaking point for bad accents." Dominique giggled, snapping a photo of her menu for her Instagram story. "Yeah, Brie, just point at the pictures. Oh wait, this menu is too fancy for pictures. Just ask for the kids' meal. Maybe they have chicken nuggets in the back." I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I got right before I closed a multi-million-dollar acquisition. It was the calm of knowing you have the winning hand while your opponent is still shuffling the deck. I closed the menu slowly, placing it on the table with deliberate precision. I didn't look at Preston. I didn't look at my mother. I looked toward the sommelier who had been hovering near the wine cellar, clearly waiting for a signal to approach the high roller table. He was a tall man with silver hair and an impeccable tuxedo, wearing the golden pin of a master sommelier on his lapel. His name was Laurent. I knew this because I had personally approved his hiring bonus last month, poaching him from a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris. I raised my hand slightly, just a single finger, and Laurent materialized at my side. Instantly. "Good evening, madame," Monsieur Laurent said, his voice smooth as silk. "May I suggest a pairing for the evening?" Preston opened his mouth, likely to order the most expensive-sounding bottle he could pronounce like a loud Cabernet, but I cut him off. I turned to Laurent and locked eyes with him, barely acknowledging the rest of the table. "Bonsoir, Laurent," I said, my French accent, flawless, honed by 2 years of studying in Lyon during my master's degree program. "Pour commencer, je voudrais le carpaccio de Saint-Jacques, avec une touche de truffe blanche." The table went silent. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware from across the room. Preston froze, his mouth still half open. My mother blinked rapidly, as if she were trying to reboot her understanding of reality. Dominique actually lowered her phone. I continued, ignoring their shock. "Et pour le vin, Laurent, nous célébrons une occasion spéciale ce soir. C'est l'anniversaire de mon père." I gestured to my father. "Je pense que le Château Margaux, 2009, serait parfait pour accompagner le bœuf." Laurent's face lit up. It was the look of a professional who realizes he is finally speaking to an equal. "Excellent choix, mademoiselle," he replied, bowing slightly. "Le 2009 est exceptionnel en ce moment. Une structure magnifique. Shall I decant it for the table?" "Yes, please, Laurent. Thank you." I switched back to English, my voice cool and detached. I picked up my napkin and placed it on my lap, looking around the table with innocent eyes. "What? Why is everyone staring? Preston, did you want to order something else? Or should we stick with the Margot?" Preston looked like he had swallowed a live fish. His face had drained of color, leaving him a sickly shade of beige. He knew enough about wine to know the name Margot. He knew enough to know that a 2009 vintage in a restaurant like this wasn't just expensive, it was astronomical. I watched his eyes dart to the wine list, frantically searching for the price. When he found it, his eyes nearly bulged out of his head. $3,000. It was right there in black and white. $3,000 for fermented grapes. He opened his mouth to protest, to yell, to cancel the order, but he couldn't. He had just spent 20 minutes bragging about his wealth, about his success, about how this dinner was nothing to him. If he canceled the bottle now over the price, he would expose himself as a fraud. He would admit that he couldn't afford the lifestyle he was projecting. I saw his leg twitch under the table. He kicked Dominique hard, hoping she would intervene. "Ow!" Dominique yelped, rubbing her shin. She looked at her husband, seeing the panic in his eyes, but she didn't know how to fix it without making them look broke. Maybe we should get something lighter," she stammered vaguely. "Nonsense," I said, smiling sweetly. Preston said to order whatever I wanted, and nothing says happy birthday to Dad like a Premier Cru Bordeaux. Right, Preston? Preston gripped his water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Of course." He choked out, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Nothing but the best for Elijah. Great choice." "Brianna, I am surprised you knew that name. Did you read it in a magazine or something?" I didn't answer. I just watched as Laurent returned with the bottle, presenting the label to me. "Not Preston for inspection." I nodded my approval. As the cork popped with a satisfying sigh, I saw my mother clutching her chest, looking at the bottle as if it were a bomb. She knew the price too. She knew exactly what this meant. It meant the bill was going to be lethal. And for the first time that night, the fear in her eyes wasn't for my embarrassment. It was for her own survival. The appetizer hadn't even arrived yet, and the blood was already in the water. The 2009 Chateau Margaux hit my palate with notes of blackcurrant and truffles, a velvet symphony that cost more than my mother's car. It was a taste of pure, sophisticated truth, which made the garbage spilling out of Preston's mouth even harder to swallow. He swirled his glass aggressively, warming the wine with his palm. A rookie mistake that would have made the sommelier weep, but I said nothing. I just watched him over the rim of my crystal goblet as he prepared to turn my father's birthday dinner into a pitch deck for his own ego. Preston tapped his fork against his glass, silencing the table. The sound rang out sharp and demanding, cutting through the ambient piano music. "All right, enough about the menu," he announced, loosening his tie slightly as the alcohol began to flush his cheeks. "We are not just here to celebrate Elijah's survival of another year. We are here to celebrate the future. Specifically, my future. My mother." Patrice leaned forward, her eyes shining with anticipation. "Oh, tell us, darling. Is it the deal? The big one?" Preston grinned, leaning back in his velvet chair while I adjusted my posture on the cold metal of my folding seat. "It is indeed, Patrice. As you know, my company, Vantage Crypto, has been looking for a strategic partner, someone with deep pockets and vision. Well, I finally hooked the whale. We are in final talks with Helix Holdings." I nearly choked on my wine. I had to bring the napkin to my lips to hide the involuntary spasm of laughter that threatened to escape Helix Holdings. My firm. The firm I founded 5 years ago in a studio apartment that now managed $2 billion in assets. The firm where I was the majority shareholder and the final decision maker. And here was my brother-in-law claiming he was in talks with me. Dominique squealed, clapping her hands, giving a little bounce in her seat. Helix. That is the company that bought the Skyline Tower, right? They are huge. Preston, oh my God, we are going to be rich. Rich. Preston held up a hand, basking in the adoration. "Calm down, babe. It is not signed yet, but it is a done deal. I had a meeting yesterday with the head of the fund. The man himself, BJ. I set my glass down very carefully. BJ. Those were my initials. Brianna Jones. But on Wall Street, I kept my identity guarded. Most people assumed BJ stood for Benjamin or Brian, purely because the financial world could not fathom that a black woman under 40 could wield that kind of power. I looked at Preston, waiting to hear how he would describe a meeting that never happened with a person he had never met. "He is a tough nut to crack," Preston continued, taking a large gulp of the wine. "Old school, 75 years old, at least. Chain smokes, cigars, talks like a sailor. You know the type. White guy, went to Yale or Harvard, inherited the money from his daddy. He is very conservative. Hates all this woke nonsense taking over corporate America. But he likes me," he said. "I remind him of himself when he was young, hungry and aggressive." My father, Elijah, looked confused, pushing his salad around his plate without eating. "I thought you said this was a technology fund, Preston. Why would an old man be interested in cryptocurrency?" Preston rolled his eyes, sighing as if explaining astrophysics to a toddler. "That is the genius of it. Elijah, BJ, needs young blood. He told me specifically, Preston's son. He called me son, actually. He said, Preston, I don't understand the blockchain, but I understand men. And you are a man who gets things done." He invited me up to his lodge in Aspen next weekend to finalize the paperwork. I sat there listening to this absolute fabrication, feeling a mix of fascination and horror. He had built an entire character in his head. A 70-year-old white man who called him son. I did not own a lodge in Aspen. I preferred the beach, and I certainly did not smoke cigars. I decided it was time to poke the bear quietly, gently, just to see how much he would lie. I took a sip of water and spoke up, my voice dripping with feigned innocence. "That is fascinating, Preston. I read in the Financial Times that Helix Holdings has a strict policy against investing in speculative assets like cryptocurrency. They focus on sustainable infrastructure and healthcare. How did you convince BJ to change his entire investment thesis?" Preston froze. The smile didn't leave his face, but his eyes went cold. He turned to me, his neck stiff. "You read that in the Financial Times, did you? Since when do you read financial news, Brianna?" "Stick to the comics," I shrugged, pouring a little more wine for my father. "Actually, I follow the market closely, And looking at your company's public filings, your user growth has stagnated for 3 quarters, and your burn rate is astronomical. You are losing $50,000 a month. Why would a conservative investor like BJ put millions into a sinking ship? The table went deadly silent. My mother looked at me horrified. Brianna, stop it right now. Do not be jealous just because Preston is successful. You are trying to ruin the mood with your negativity. I am just asking a business question, Mom, I replied calmly. If he is about to close a deal, he should be able to answer simple due diligence questions. So Preston did. BJ, asked to see your audited financials. Or did he just like the cut of your jib? Preston slammed his wine glass down, sloshing a few drops of the $3,000 vintage onto the white tablecloth. Listen to me, you little librarian, or whatever it is you do these days. BJ didn't ask about the burn rate because he understands vision. He understands potential, something you will never grasp, picking up pennies on the sidewalk. He is investing in me, in the man. And for your information, he already verbally committed $2 million. So take your little newspaper articles and shove them. Dominique jumped in, defending her husband. Yeah, Brianna, stop acting like you know business. You literally take the bus. You are embarrassing yourself. Preston is friends with billionaires. You are just… you. I leaned back on my folding chair, the metal digging into my spine, but I felt more powerful than anyone in the room. Verbal commitment. $2 million. The lies were getting bigger and bolder. He was digging a hole so deep he would never be able to climb out. He was betting his entire reputation on a friendship with a ghost. Wow, I said softly. Taking another scallop. A lodge in Aspen. Huh? Did he tell you which mountain it is on? Because I heard the skiing is terrible this time of year. Preston scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. We are not going for the skiing, Brianna. We are going to smoke Cubans and sign checks. Men's work. Now silence yourself. The main course is coming, and I don't want your bitter energy tainting my wagyu. He turned back to my father, raising his glass again. To the future, Elijah. To the millions coming our way, courtesy of my good friend BJ. My father raised his glass, his hand shaking slightly, forcing a weak smile. He didn't believe Preston, but he didn't have the fight in him to challenge the lie. I raised my glass too, hiding my own smile behind the rim. To BJ, I whispered, knowing that BJ was currently deciding that Preston's company wasn't just getting a rejection letter, it was getting blacklisted from every financial institution in Chicago. The pitch was over. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the check. The waiter placed a plate of truffle-infused scallops in front of me, but my appetite had been replaced by a cold, clinical fascination with the man sitting at the head of the table. Preston was now on his third glass of the vintage Margot, and the alcohol was doing exactly what I expected, loosening his tongue and stripping away the thin veneer of sophistication he tried so hard to maintain. He was leaning back in his velvet chair, gesturing wildly with a fork, a piece of steak impaled on the tines like a victim of his ambition. You see, Elijah, he boomed, ignoring the fact that other diners were glancing in our direction. Most people do not understand the paradigm shift we are witnessing. They think money is paper. They think it is gold bars in a vault, but that is archaic thinking. The future is decentralized. It is about leverage and vertical integration of the blockchain to create a synergistic ecosystem of value. My mother. Patrice nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide with feigned understanding, as if Preston were reciting poetry instead of a word salad of business buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. Oh, that sounds incredible. Preston, synergistic value. She looked at me across the table with a smug expression. See, Brianna, this is the kind of intellectual conversation we usually have. You should take notes. Maybe you will learn something to help you find a job. I sliced my scallop carefully, the knife gliding through the tender meat with zero resistance. I could have stayed silent. I could have let him ramble on about ecosystems and paradigms until he passed out from exhaustion. But he was insulting the intelligence of everyone in the room, including the very industry I had spent a decade mastering. I decided to test the structural integrity of his house of cards. Preston, I said, my voice cutting through his monologue with the precision of a scalpel. You keep using the word leverage, but in your last quarterly report to investors, which is public record by the way, your debt-to-equity ratio was 4-1. That is not leverage, that is overexposure. In a volatile market like crypto, isn't that essentially gambling with other people's money? Preston stopped chewing. The piece of steak sat in his cheek, making him look like a squirrel caught stealing nuts. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously before he regained his composure, or at least his arrogance. That is a very simplistic way of looking at it. Brianna, he sneered, wiping his mouth with the linen napkin. You are looking at legacy metrics. You are applying 20th century accounting to 21st century innovation. My debt load is strategic. It allows for rapid scaling. BJ understands this. That is why he is backing me. He knows that you have to burn cash to light the fire. Burn cash, I repeated, leaning forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand. So your burn rate is what, exactly? Last I checked, your customer acquisition cost was hovering around $500 per user, while your lifetime value per user was less than $200. You are losing $300 every time a new customer signs up. How exactly does scaling that model lead to profit, unless you plan to lose money in higher volumes? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the piano player seemed to pause. My father, Elijah, looked at me with a sudden spark of recognition in his eyes. He had worked in a post office, not a bank, but he knew basic math. He knew that spending $500 to make $200 was a recipe for bankruptcy. Preston's face turned a mottled shade of red, mixing with the flush of the wine. He slammed his fork down onto the china, creating a sharp clatter that made my mother jump. Listen to me, you little amateur, he spat, leaning over the table, his spit flying slightly. Do not sit there in your discount blazer and lecture me on unit economics. You have never run a business in your life. You have never had to make payroll. You have never had the pressure of millions of dollars resting on your shoulders. You sit in your little apartment reading free articles on the internet and think you are an expert. I am asking a basic question, Preston, I replied, keeping my voice dangerously calm. If BJ is investing $2 million, surely he asked you how you plan to close that $300 deficit? Or did you tell him it was a strategic loss too? Preston stood up halfway, his chair screeching against the floor. I do not have to explain myself to you, he shouted, drawing the attention of the entire room. I am the CEO of a company that is about to go global. You are a 32-year-old woman with no husband, no career, and no prospects. You are a leech, Brianna. You are here eating my food, drinking my wine, and breathing my air, simply because my wife felt sorry for you. Dominique chimed in right on cue, sensing that her husband was losing the intellectual battle and needing to shift the ground to something she understood. Social status. Oh my God, Brianna, stop being so jealous. It is pathetic, she said, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She reached over and squeezed Preston's hand, looking at him with adoring eyes. Baby, ignore her. She is just bitter, she sees you succeeding. She sees us living this life, and she can't handle it. She wants to tear you down because it makes her feel better about her own failures. My mother. Patrice sighed, shaking her head as if I were an unruly toddler throwing a tantrum. Brianna, apologized to your brother-in-law immediately. You are ruining your father's birthday with this interrogation. Preston is kind enough to educate us on his business, and you are trying to pick holes in it out of spite. It is ugly, simply ugly. I looked at them. These three people who claimed to be my family. Preston, the fraud, Dominique, the sycophant, and Patrice, the enabler. They were so convinced of their superiority, so wrapped up in the illusion of their success, that they couldn't see the reality staring them in the face. They didn't know that the deficit I mentioned was the exact reason I had rejected Preston's loan application 3 hours ago. They didn't know that the BJ he kept invoking as his savior was actually his executioner. I am not jealous, Dominique, I said, taking a sip of the Margot, savoring the irony along with the tannins. And I am not bitter. I am just fascinating by the math. Preston says he is a visionary. I am just trying to see what he sees, because from where I am sitting on this folding chair, it looks a lot like a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a slide deck. Preston pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice trembling with rage. One more word, Brianna. One more word and I will have security drag you out of here myself. You are a guest, a non-paying guest. Know your place. Shut your mouth and eat the food I paid for or get out. I held his gaze for a long moment, refusing to blink. I saw the fear behind his anger. He was terrified that I was right. He was terrified that the house of cards was wobbling, but he thought he could bully me into silence. He thought his volume could drown out the truth. I picked up my fork and stabbed a piece of scallop, smiling, coldly. Fine, Preston, I said softly. Let us not talk about business anymore. Let us talk about the check. I am sure paying for this meal won't be a problem for a man with your leverage. Preston slumped back into his chair, draining his glass triumphantly, thinking he had won. Thinking he had put me back in my box. He didn't realize that by silencing me, he had just removed the only person at the table who could have actually saved him. Form what was coming next. He signaled the waiter for another bottle, oblivious to the fact that his credit limit was already screaming for mercy. The financial smackdown was over, but the real bankruptcy was just beginning. The bottle of Chateau Margaux was empty, and with every drop that disappeared into Preston's system, the filter between his brain and his mouth evaporated completely. The ambiance of the restaurant was soft and refined, but our table had become a designated disaster zone of unsolicited opinions. Preston leaned back in his chair, his tie now completely undone, looking at my sister Dominique with a glaze in his eyes that he probably mistook for love. It was not love, it was possession. He looked at her the way a collector looks at a rare artifact he found at a garage sale and polished up for display. You know, he said, his voice slurring slightly, but loud enough to carry over the jazz piano. I really did save you, Dominique. I really did. I look at where you came from. He gestured vaguely at my parents and me, with his wine glass spilling a few red droplets on the pristine white cloth. And I think to myself, Preston, you are a saint. You took this girl out of the hood and put her in a penthouse. Dominique giggled, leaning into him, oblivious to the insult wrapped in the compliment. Oh, stop it, babe. We didn't live in the hood. We lived in a subdivision. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Same thing, honey. Compared to where I grew up, it was basically the jungle. But that is what I love about you. You are adaptable. You learned fast. You learned how to dress, how to speak, how to order wine. You shed that baggage. He paused, searching for the right word and finding the worst one possible. You shed that heavy urban energy. You are civilized now, thanks to me. I felt my blood run cold. It was the kind of casual racism that hides behind a smile, the kind that is terrifying because the person saying it genuinely believes they are being complimentary. I looked at my mother, expecting her to be outraged. She had worked 2 jobs to send us to private schools to ensure we never felt less than. But Patrice just smiled. A tight, frozen smile, tapping her fingers nervously on the table. Oh, Preston, you are terrible, she said with a forced laugh, protecting the ATM machine that was her son-in-law. We raised them well, but of course you have given Dominique a lifestyle we could only dream of. We are very grateful. Grateful. Preston echoed, latching onto the word. Yes, grateful. That is the key. You should all be grateful. But gratitude requires understanding value. And I don't think you people really understand the value of $1. Not the way I do. He turned his gaze slowly toward my father. Elijah sat silently, his hands folded on the table. Those large, rough hands that had carried mailbags through 40 Chicago winters to put food on our table. Take Elijah here, Preston said, pointing his fork at my father like an accusation. Elijah, you worked for the post office, right? Carrying letters, walking up and down driveways chased by dogs fighting the snow. How much did you make a year at the peak? 50,060. My father didn't look up. I made enough to raise my family, he said quietly, his voice dignified and low. Preston snorted, shaking his head. See, that is the problem. Small thinking. You traded your body for pennies. You broke your back for 40 years to make what I make in a bad afternoon. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. I clicked a button on my phone this morning while I was brushing my teeth, and I made $10,000 just on the volatility of Bitcoin. $10,000, Elijah. That is 2 months of your life walking in the snow, and I did it in my pajamas. That is the difference between labor and intellect. I saw my father's jaw tighten, the muscles in his neck corded with strain. He was a proud man, a man who believed in the dignity of service, who knew the names of everyone on his route, who had checked in on elderly neighbors during heat waves. Preston was reducing a lifetime of honorable contribution to a dollar amount, and finding it wanting. It is not just about the money. Preston continued warming up to his favorite subject, his own superiority. It is about genetics, honestly. It is about the capacity for complex thought. Some people are bred to carry bags, and some people are bred to move markets. It is just biology, Elijah. No offense, but you pass down some limitations to your daughters. Dominique was smart enough to marry up to dilute the pool, so to speak, but Brianna. He swung his gaze to me, his eyes dead and cold. She is just like you, Elijah. Hard-headed, working class, destined to struggle because she doesn't have the mental hardware to elevate herself. The silence at the table was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having detonated, but the shockwave hadn't hit yet. I looked at my father. I saw his hand, the one resting on the table, curl into a fist. It was a slow movement trembling with 40 years of suppressed rage. He wasn't violent. He had never raised a hand to us in his life. But in that moment, looking at this soft-handed drunk man insulting his bloodline, I saw a flash of dangerous energy in my father's eyes. Elijah! Don't! My mother whispered fiercely, grabbing his wrist. She wasn't protecting Dad. She was protecting the dinner. She was protecting the illusion. Don't ruin this. Preston is just drunk. He doesn't mean it, I mean every word. Preston slurred, pulling his arm away from Dominique, who looked uncomfortable for the first time, looking down at her lap. I am the savior of this family, and saviors get to speak the truth. If it weren't for me, you would all be eating at Denny's right now, discussing your coupons. So smile, Elijah, and thank me for upgrading your gene pool. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my wine glass. Though the urge was so strong my fingers twitched. Instead, I did something far more damaging deeply and permanently. I slid my phone out of my pocket and placed it face down on the table. The voice memo app had been running for the last 5 minutes. The red waveform was pulsing, capturing every slur, every insult, every racist microaggression Preston had vomited onto the table. This was not just a recording for personal validation. This was evidence. In the corporate world, morality clauses are standard in every high-level contract, especially for anyone seeking partnership with a firm like Helix Holdings. Racism explicit or implied was grounds for immediate termination of talks and blacklisting. I looked at the phone knowing that Preston had just talked himself out of a career. He thought he was asserting dominance over a retired mailman. In reality, he was handing the mailman's daughter the weapon to destroy him. I am going to the restroom, I said, standing up abruptly. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Sit down, Brianna Preston barked. I didn't dismiss you. I ignored him, walking past his chair. The air around him smelled of expensive cologne and cheap cruelty. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, but I didn't go to the restroom. I went to find Mr. Henderson, the head of security waiting in the shadows. I showed him the phone screen and the recording timer still ticking. "Is it time, madam?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, looking over my shoulder at the drunk man insulting my father. "Not yet," I whispered, putting the phone back in my pocket. "Let him finish his performance. Let him dig the hole so deep he can see the center of the earth. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he won. And then when the bill comes, I want to watch the light go out of his eyes." I walked back to the table, watching my father slowly unclench his fist, forcing himself to swallow his pride one last time, for the sake of his wife's delusions. It broke my heart, but it also steeled my resolve. Preston wasn't just going to pay the bill tonight. He was going to pay for every step my father took in the snow, every letter he delivered, and every sacrifice he made. I sat back down on my metal folding chair and smiled a terrifying, wolfish smile. "You are right, Preston," I said, picking up my fork. "It really is all about genetics, and you are about to find out exactly what kind of DNA runs in this family." The tension from Preston's racist tirade still hung over the table like a toxic fog sticking to the back of my throat. My father Elijah was staring at his empty plate, looking smaller and more defeated than I had ever seen him. He had absorbed the insults about his genetics and his career, simply to keep the peace for my mother. But Preston, having successfully asserted his dominance, decided it was time to pivot. He needed to transition from the cruel disciplinarian to the benevolent God, giving out blessings to his subjects. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, dropping it carelessly onto the table, covering the wine stains he had made earlier. "All right, enough. Gloom and doom," he announced, his voice booming with forced cheerfulness, shifting gears so fast it gave me whiplash. "I did not bring you to the finest restaurant in Chicago just to talk about the stock market. I brought you here to honor the patriarch of the family." My mother, Patrice, perked up immediately, sensing the shift in the wind. She smoothed her hair and touched my father's arm. "Elijah, look at Preston. He is speaking to you. Smile, darling." Preston reached under his chair and pulled out a box. It wasn't just any box. It was a green leather box, the specific shade of forest green that immediately signals wealth to anyone who pays attention to luxury branding. He placed it in the center of the table, pushing aside the crystal salt shakers, making it the centerpiece of our existence. "You know, Elijah." Preston began, his hand resting heavily on the box. "You are a simple man, and I respect that, I really do. You drove a used Ford. You wore the same watch for 30 years, that cheap Timex with the scratched face. But a man of your age, a man who raised a daughter like Dominique, deserves to know what it feels like to have weight on his wrist. Real weight." He flipped the lid open with a theatrical flourish. Dominique gasped loudly, holding her phone steady to capture the reveal. My mother let out a high-pitched sound of pure avarice, pressing her hands to her cheeks. Sitting on the beige velvet cushion was a gold watch. It was massive, a Rolex day-date, widely known as the President. It was solid gold, or at least it appeared to be, with a champagne dial and diamond markers where the numbers should have been. It glittered aggressively under the restaurant's chandelier, catching the light and throwing it back into our eyes. "Happy birthday, old man," Preston said, leaning back and crossing his arms, his chest puffed out like a rooster. "That right there is $40,000. 40,000? That is probably more than your pension pays out in 2 years. But do not worry about the cost. I picked it up this morning. It is nothing to me. Just a rounding error." My father stared at the watch, terrified. He didn't reach for it. He looked at it as if it were a radioactive isotope that might burn his skin. "Preston, I cannot accept this," he stammered, his voice trembling. "This is too much. I'm afraid to wear it. What if I scratch it?" "Don't be silly, Elijah," my mother snapped, reaching out and taking the box herself, her eyes glued to the gold. "Of course you will accept it. It is a symbol of our family's success. Put it on. She pulled the watch from the cushion, and the heavy gold links clinked against each other. Preston beamed, soaking in the adoration. But from my seat on the folding chair, I was leaning forward, my eyes narrowing. The advantage of being the invisible person at the table is that nobody notices when you are scrutinizing the details. And I knew watches. I had bought a real Rolex day date for my chief financial officer last year as a retirement gift. I knew exactly how the light should play off 18-karat gold. I knew the specific weight of the platinum rotor inside the movement, and most importantly, I knew how the second hand should move. "Can I see it, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice casual, extending my hand. My mother hesitated, clutching the watch to her chest, as if I were going to snatch it and run. "Why do you want to see it, Brianna?" "It is heavy. Be careful. Do not drop it." "I just want to admire Preston's taste." I lied, smiling a tight shark. "Like smile?" Reluctantly, she handed it to me. The metal was warm from her hands. As soon as I held it, two things happened simultaneously. First, I felt the weight. It was heavy, but it was the wrong kind of heavy. It felt unbalanced, top-heavy, like the case was weighted with lead rather than the density of solid gold. But the smoking gun was the dial. I looked closely at the second hand. On a genuine Rolex with a mechanical, perpetual movement, the second hand sweeps. It glides around the face in a smooth, continuous motion, a mesmerizing flow of engineering perfection. But on this watch, the second hand did not glide. It ticked, it moved in distinct jerky. 1 second increments. Tick, tick, tick. It was a quartz movement. Battery-operated, hidden inside a counterfeit shell. It was a super clone, a high-end fake that you can buy on Canal Street or the dark web for maybe $500 tops. Preston had not spent $40,000. He had spent a few $100 on a prop and pocketed the glory. I looked up at Preston, watching him preen. He believed his own lie. That was the terrifying thing about him. He probably convinced himself that since it looked like a $40,000 watch, it was a $40,000 watch. "This is incredible, Preston," I said, turning the watch over in my hands, looking for the hallmarks on the clasp. Usually these pieces come with a lot of paperwork: the green warranty card, the COSC certification, the serial number, hang tag. Did you leave those in the car? We should probably keep them safe for Dad, specifically for insurance purposes. Preston's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. He took a large gulp of his wine, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip. "Oh, the papers. Yeah, I have them at home in my safe. Didn't want to bring all that clutter to dinner. Just the watch is enough, right?" "Really?" I pressed, staring at the jerky second hand. "Because usually authorized dealers insist you take the box and papers together. It affects the resale value heavily. And looking at this bezel." I ran my thumb over the fluted gold ring around the face, feeling the sharp edges. Usually, gold is softer, smoother. "Did you get this from the boutique on Michigan Avenue?" Preston slammed his glass down a little too hard. "Listen to me, Brianna." He snapped, his defensiveness flaring up instantly. "I have connections. Okay. I do not shop at retail like a tourist. I have a private jeweler. A guy who imports directly, getting around the taxes and the red tape. It is a gray market deal. That is how smart money buys luxury. We do not pay for the paper, we pay for the gold. So stop interrogating me and give the watch to your father." "A private jeweler?" I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Imports directly. Interesting." Because Rolex is notoriously strict about their supply chain. But hey, if you say it is real, it must be real, right? After all, who would lie about a birthday gift to their own father-in-law? I handed the watch to my father, watching his hands shake as he held it. He looked at Preston with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Preston," he whispered. "I have never owned anything this shiny." "You earned it," Elijah Preston said magnanimously, recovering his composure now that the watch was out of my hands. "Wear it in good health, And make sure you roll up your sleeve when you go to the grocery store. Let the neighbors see what kind of family you married your daughter into. But before my father could even attempt to unclasp the bracelet and put it on, my mother intervened again. She reached over and took the watch from his trembling hands. "Wait a minute, Elijah," she said, frowning slightly, looking at the size of the links. "This is way too big for your wrist. You have such thin wrists now that you have lost weight. It will just slide around and look silly." She unclasped the bracelet and slipped it onto her own wrist, which was thicker, fleshy, and eager. The gold looked gaudy against her skin, but she looked at it with pure lust. "You know," she said, turning her wrist under the light, admiring the sparkle, "maybe I should hold on to it for safekeeping until we can get it resized. I would hate for you to lose it, Elijah." And honestly, it looks quite unisex, doesn't it, Preston? Big watches are in style for women right now. Preston shrugged, clearly, not caring who wore it, as long as the price tag was acknowledged. "Sure, Patrice, you wear it. It suits you, you have the presence for it. Elijah can wear it on Sundays." I watched my father's face crumble. He had been terrified of the gift, but having it taken away by his own wife 5 seconds after receiving it was a different kind of humiliation. He pulled his hand back, placing it in his lap, covering his bare, thin wrist with his other hand. "It is okay," he mumbled quietly, looking down at the tablecloth. "Mom should wear it. It is too nice for me anyway." I sat back on my metal folding chair, listening to the ticking of the fake watch on my mother's wrist. Tick, tick, tick. It was counting down the minutes to their destruction. Preston thought he had bought loyalty with a $500 counterfeit. He thought he had fooled us all, but he had just given me the final piece of ammunition I needed. When the police eventually came, and they would come, I would make sure to mention that he deals in counterfeit goods too. Fraud upon fraud, layers of lies painted in gold paint that was already starting to look a little dull under the harsh lights of the truth. The gold-plated fraud of a watch was now clamped tightly around my mother's wrist, ticking away the seconds of our collective deception. My father Elijah sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking at the empty space where the watch should have been. He looked naked without it, not because he wanted the gold, but because he had been stripped of his dignity, yet again by the very people who claimed to honor him. I reached into my blazer pocket, my fingers brushed against the small, rough envelope I had been carrying for weeks. It was just standard manila paper, slightly wrinkled from being in my purse, nothing like the green leather and gold embossing of Preston's gift. But inside this humble packet lay a truth that money could not buy, and a history that could not be counterfeited. I cleared my throat softly, but in the silence of the table it sounded like a gavel strike. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "I have something for you too. It is not as shiny as Preston's gift, and it didn't cost $40,000, but I think it fits you better." I slid the envelope across the white tablecloth. It looked out of place among the crystal wine glasses and silver cutlery, like a fallen leaf in a jewelry store. Dominique snorted, lowering her phone for a moment to inspect the offering. "What is that, Brie? A coupon for a free hug? Or did you finally pay him back the $20 you borrowed in high school?" My mother. Patrice rolled her eyes, not even bothering to look at the envelope. "Oh, honestly, Brianna, we just had a moment with a Rolex. Couldn't you have waited until we got home, giving him your little whatever that is?" Right after Preston's generosity feels a bit tacky. I ignored them both. My eyes were locked on my father. "Go ahead, Dad. Open it." Elijah reached out his hand, shaking slightly. He picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the object inside. It was heavy but small. He tore open the flap and tipped it over. A single old brass key slid out onto the table with a dull clink. It was not a shiny key, it was tarnished dark with age and use. There were scratches on the bow, and the teeth were worn down from decades of turning in a lock. It was the kind of key you keep in a junk drawer, the kind that opens a door you haven't walked through in years. Dominique burst out laughing, a harsh, cackling sound that made the couple at the next table turn and stare. "Oh my God, are you serious? A key. A rusty old key. What is this for?" "A storage unit where you keep your old participation trophies." "This is hilarious. Preston, look at this." Preston leaned forward, picking up the key with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. He held it up to the light, squinting mockingly. "Well, well, well, what do we have here? Is this the key to the city? Or maybe the key to your heart, Brianna? Because if it is for a car, I think you might need a tetanus shot before you drive it. This is just scrap metal." "Elijah, don't tell me you actually want this debris on the table." My father didn't laugh. He was staring at the key as if he had seen a ghost. He reached out and took it from Preston's fingers, cradling it in his palm. He ran his thumb over the worn grooves, his calloused skin recognizing the metal memory. This is the key to the shop," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Dad," I said, leaning forward. "It is Grandpa's old wood shop on 43rd Street. You sold it 20 years ago to pay for Dominique's private school tuition and my college books. You sold your tools, you sold the land, and you went to work at the post office because you said your family came first." I took a deep breath, fighting back the emotion rising in my throat. "I bought it back, Dad. I bought the building 3 months ago. I tracked down the new owner and I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And I didn't just buy the walls. I restocked it. I found vintage saws, the same lathe you used to have, and I filled the lumber rack with walnut and cherry wood. It is yours. It is all yours. The deed is in the envelope under the card. You don't have to carry mailbags anymore. You can build again." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness or fear. It was the silence of shock. My mother, Patrice, stared at me, her mouth slightly open, trying to process the information. Her daughter, the failure, the disappointment, had just bought a piece of commercial real estate in Chicago, but before the beauty of the moment could sink in, Preston shattered it. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, that is rich. That is truly rich. So let me get this straight. Your big gift is manual labor. You bought him a dusty old shed so he can go back to sweating and inhaling sawdust. You want him to spend his retirement working like a dog while I am trying to give him the lifestyle of a king." He turned to my father, shaking his head. "Elijah, tell her, you don't want to go back to that hole. You want to sit on a yacht wearing a Rolex. You want leisure, not labor." "This isn't a gift, Brianna. This is a sentence. It is a sentence to poverty thinking," Dominique chimed in, shaking her head in disbelief. "Yeah, Brie, seriously. Dad is 65. He is tired. He doesn't want to be a carpenter. Again, that is so blue collar. We are trying to elevate the family brand, and you are dragging us back to the workshop." It is embarrassing. My mother recovered from her shock and immediately sided with the money, or at least the appearance of it. "Brianna, your intentions are sweet, I suppose, but Preston is right. Your father deserves rest. He deserves luxury, not splinters and noise. Why would he want to go back to that dirty old neighborhood?" I looked at my father. He wasn't listening to them. He was gripping the key so tightly, his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the Rolex on my mother's wrist. He was looking at the key as if it were a diamond. "Dad," I said softly, ignoring the venom coming from the other side of the table. "You told me once that wood has a soul. You told me that shaping something with your hands is the only time you feel free. You don't have to do it for money. You don't have to sell a single chair. You can just build because you love it." Preston slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough of this sentimental garbage. It is pathetic. You are romanticizing poverty. Brianna, that is what this is. You are jealous that I can buy him gold, so you buy him work. You are trying to sabotage his enjoyment of the finer things because you can't afford them yourself. It is small. It is petty. And frankly, it is insulting to me." He reached for the key again. intending to swipe it away, or mock it further. But my father's hand snapped shut over it. It was a sudden, violent movement that surprised us all. Elijah pulled his hand back to his chest, protecting the key, protecting his dream. "Stop it," Elijah said. His voice was not loud, but it was firm. Granite, hard. "Stop talking." Preston. Preston blinked, stunned by the rebuke. "Excuse me. I am just saying that. I said stop talking," my father repeated, looking up. His eyes were wet, but they were clear for the first time all night. He looked at Preston, then at Patrice, and finally at me. He didn't look at me with pity anymore. He looked at me with pride. "I never wanted to stop building," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I stopped because I had to. I stopped because I had two little girls who needed braces and tuition and clothes. I traded my tools for a mailbag because that is what a father does. But I never stopped missing the smell of cedar. I never stopped missing the feel of a plane shaving a perfect curl of wood." He opened his hand, looking at the tarnished brass key resting against his skin. This is the best gift I have ever received. It is not just a shop. It is my life back. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you for remembering who I really am." My mother looked horrified. "Elijah, don't be dramatic. The watch is worth $40,000. That key is... It is just a dirty building. You are choosing a shed over a Rolex." "I am choosing my dignity, Patrice," my father said quietly. He didn't shout, he didn't argue, he just stated a fact. And for the first time in 30 years, I saw my mother shrink. She looked at the gold watch on her wrist, and suddenly, it didn't look like a trophy. It looked like a handcuff. Preston, however, was not capable of shame. He was only capable of anger. He scoffed, pouring himself another glass of wine, shaking his head in disgust. "Unbelievable. You people are unbelievable. You have a diamond right in front of you, and you choose a rock. That is why you will always be poor. Elijah, it is a mindset. And clearly Brianna has inherited it. Enjoy your sawdust. I hope the termites don't eat your retirement plan." I smiled, taking a sip of my water. Knowing that the termites Preston should be worried about were the ones currently eating the foundation of his own company. And as I watched my father clutch that key to his heart, I knew that the real value at this table wasn't measured in carats. It was measured in the look of a man who had just been given permission to breathe again after 20 years of holding his breath. The Rolex was fake. The love behind the key was the only real thing in the room, and soon Preston was going to learn exactly how much that kind of reality costs. The final course had been cleared away, leaving only the debris of excess scattered across the white tablecloth, stained napkins, empty crystal glasses, and the lingering scent of espresso and expensive cognac. The air in the private dining room felt heavy, not just from the rich food, but from the weight of the inevitable conclusion approaching fast. My father, Elijah, sat quietly, touching the brass key in his pocket every few seconds, as if to reassure himself it was real. My mother, Patrice, was busy reapplying her lipstick, checking her reflection in the back of a spoon, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering over her son-in-law's head. Then came the moment. That every restaurant-goer knows, but only the insolvent fear. The arrival of the check. Marcus, our waiter, approached the table with the solemnity of a priest carrying a Bible. In his hands rested a black leather folio padded and heavy. It landed softly next to Preston's elbow. Preston didn't even look at it. He was too busy finishing a story about a yacht trip he had supposedly taken in the Mediterranean, a story I knew was false because his passport had expired 3 years ago. He waved his hand dismissively, keeping up the charade of the man for whom money is merely an abstract concept. "Just take care of it, Marcus," Preston said, not breaking eye contact with his own reflection in the window. "Add 20% for yourself. You did an adequate job tonight." Marcus cleared his throat gently, bowing slightly. "Sir, per house policy for bills exceeding $5,000. I must ask you to review the itemized receipt and provide the card physically. Preston rolled his eyes, sighing loudly as if the rules of banking were a personal insult to his dignity. Fine, bureaucracy is the death of joy, isn't it, Elijah? He flipped open the leather folder. I watched his eyes scan the bottom line. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw his pupils dilate. I saw the breath hitch in his throat. $18,500.42. The Chateau Margaux, the Wagyu beef, the caviar service, the cognac. It had all added up to the price of a mid-sized sedan. My mother leaned over, trying to peek at the number. Oh my. Is it a lot? Preston, you shouldn't have been so extravagant for us. Preston slammed the folder shut quickly, hiding the number. It is nothing. Patrice Penny's pocket change. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a sleek carbon fiber clip designed to hold only a few cards, the mark of a minimalist billionaire. He slid out a single black card with a dramatic flourish and slapped it onto the leather folder. There you go, Marcus. Put it on the black card. And don't scratch it. I stared at the card. Form my folding chair. It was black. It had the centurion warrior head on it. It looked impressive from a distance, but I was sitting 4 feet away, and I have 20 vision. I saw the slight bubble of air near the chip. I saw the edge where the black vinyl sticker didn't quite line up with the plastic underneath. It wasn't an American Express Centurion card. It was a standard Wells Fargo debit card wrapped in a $20 decal ordered from Amazon. It was the ultimate prop for the ultimate pretender. Marcus took the folder and walked away, heading toward the point-of-sale terminal near the service station. The table descended into a comfortable silence. My mother was beaming, touching the fake Rolex on her wrist, telling Dominique how proud she was to be part of such a powerful family. Dominique was editing her photos, filtering out the redness in Preston's face. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Usually a transaction takes 10 seconds. I saw the terminal frowning. He swiped the card. It didn't work. He inserted the chip. He waited. He pulled it out and wiped it on his apron. Then he inserted it again. He typed something into the screen, looking confused. Then he printed a small slip of paper, the receipt of rejection. Marcus walked back to the table slowly. His walk was different this time. It wasn't the confident stride of a server expecting a big tip. It was the hesitant shuffle of a man who has to deliver bad news to a volatile customer. He leaned down to Preston's ear, keeping his voice a professional whisper meant to save face. "Sir, I am afraid there is a problem with the card. It was declined." Preston laughed loudly, a harsh barking sound meant to cover his panic. "Declined impossible. You probably inserted it wrong. Try it again. Make sure you wipe the chip. It is very sensitive technology. I tried it 3 times." "Sir," Marcus said, his voice remaining flat. "The terminal says, 'Do not honor it. Suggest you contact your issuing bank.'" Preston slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Do not honor. Do you know who I am? I have a limit of $500,000 on that card. Your machine is broken. This is ridiculous. Get me another machine, sir. The machine is working perfectly for all other guests," Marcus replied, his patience thinning. Preston stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple, wiping sweat from his forehead, giving away his fear. "Fine. I will call them. It is probably the fraud department. They see a large charge and get nervous because they are used to protecting my assets. I will clear this up in 10 seconds. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. He put it on speaker for a second, then quickly took it off, holding it to his ear, screaming into the receiver. "Hello, yes, this is Preston Vantage. I am at the Azure Summit and my card is being rejected. Unlock it immediately." "Yes, I authorized it. Do you hear me?" I said, "Unlock it." I watched him pacing back and forth near the window, waving his free arm wildly. But here's the thing about observing people. I noticed that his screen was black. The phone wasn't even on a call. He was yelling at a dead screen, pantomiming a conversation with a bank that wasn't listening, trying to buy time, trying to bully reality into changing. After a minute of fake shouting, he hung up and marched back to the table, looking flustered but defiant. They said, "It is a system error on their end. Their servers are down for maintenance." Can you believe that? Multi-billion-dollar bank and they do maintenance on a Saturday night? Unbelievable. He looked at Marcus, expecting the waiter to sympathize, expecting the bill to magically vanish until Monday. But Marcus just stood there holding the leather folder. "I still need a form of payment," Sir Marcus said coldly. Preston turned to Dominique, his eyes wide and desperate. "Babe, give him your card. The bank says my accounts are frozen for an hour until the server reboots. Use yours. I will wire you the money first thing in the morning." Dominique looked hesitant. She clutched her purse, looking around the room, seeing the other diners starting to stare. The illusion of the golden couple was cracking. She didn't want to expose herself, but she had no choice. She pulled out her rose gold credit card, a flashy piece of plastic that she used to fund her influencer lifestyle. "Here," she said, handing it to Marcus with a trembling hand. "It has a high limit. Just run it." Marcus took the card and walked back to the terminal. The tension at the table was suffocating. My mother Patrice had stopped smiling. She looked from Preston to Dominique, sensing that the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Elijah sat perfectly still, his hand still over his pocket protecting his key, disassociating from the disaster unfolding in front of him. I watched Marcus at the terminal. He inserted Dominique's card. He waited 5 seconds. The slip printed out. He tore it off and walked back. The walk was faster this time. The verdict was clear. "I am sorry, ma'am," Marcus said loud enough for the next table to hear. "This card is also declined. The error code indicates insufficient funds." Dominique gasped, snatching the card back. "That is impossible. I paid the minimum balance last week." Preston looked like a trapped animal. He was sweating profusely now, the expensive wine turning into toxic perspiration dripping down his neck. He patted his pockets, pretending to look for another card that didn't exist. The bill sat there on the table. $18,500 waiting to be paid, and the self-proclaimed billionaire had absolutely no way to pay it. "This is a conspiracy," Preston hissed, his voice cracking. He looked at Marcus with pure hatred. "You are doing this on purpose. Your machines are rigged against us." Marcus didn't blink, "Sir. If you cannot provide payment, I will have to involve the manager. And per protocol the police." The word police hung in the air, snapping the last thread of their dignity. My mother let out a small whimper. Preston looked around the room, realizing there was no exit, realizing he couldn't talk his way out of math. The check was real. The debt was real. And for the first time all night, the silence at the table wasn't caused by his arrogance. It was caused by his absolute humiliating poverty. I took a sip of water from my cheap glass, savoring the moment, knowing that in about 30 seconds, he was going to turn his eyes to the folding chair and ask the unthinkable. The silence that descended on our private alcove was heavier than the gold-plated fake watch weighing down my mother's wrist. It was the suffocating silence of a reality check that had arrived exactly 3 hours too late. The black leather bill folder sat in the center of the table like a loaded weapon, and the little slip of paper protruding from it with the words, "Transaction declined," was the bullet that had finally pierced Preston's armor. The air conditioning in the Azure Summit was set to a comfortable 70 degrees, but Preston was sweating as if he were running a marathon in the desert. His face was a map of panic, his eyes darting from the waiter to his wife and finally landing on me with a terrifying clarity. He needed a villain. He needed a reason for this failure that did not involve his own bank account or his own lies. And in the twisted logic of a narcissist, when reality attacks, you do not apologize, you find a scapegoat. Preston wiped his mouth with a shaking hand and pointed a finger directly across the table at me. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, vibrating with suppressed rage. I stared at him, blinking slowly, purely to infuriate him. "My fault?" I asked calmly, placing my water glass down with deliberate precision. "Please explain to me, Preston, how your credit card being declined for insufficient funds is my fault. Did I magnetically degauss the strip with my mind, or did I hack into the banking mainframe while eating my salad?" "Don't play dumb with me, Brianna," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table, causing the empty wine bottle to rattle ominously. "You ran up this bill. You did this on purpose. You ordered the most expensive items on the menu just to embarrass me. You knew the banking system was down for maintenance. You knew I couldn't access my offshore accounts tonight, and you took advantage of it." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The banking system was not down. There were no offshore accounts. There was only a debit card linked to an empty checking account, and a man drowning in his own delusion. "I ordered exactly what you told me to order, Preston," I replied, my voice cool and detached. "You insisted on the best. You insisted on showing my father a good time. You explicitly told me to order without looking at the price. Are you saying you can't afford the hospitality you forced upon us?" Preston stood up, knocking his chair back slightly. "I can afford it 10 times over, but my liquid assets are tied up in the merger that you were too stupid to understand. And now because of how? Your gluttony. Because you had to have the $3,000 wine. We are in this situation. You drank the wine, Brianna. You ate the steak, so you are going to pay for it, my mother." Patrice jumped in immediately, grasping at this lifeline. Preston threw her. She saw a way out, a way to save face, a way to keep the illusion alive. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong and desperate. "Brianna, listen to your brother-in-law," she pleaded, her eyes wide and wet with panic. "He is right. You did order the expensive wine. You should contribute. It is only fair. You have been working for 10 years. You have no husband, no kids, no mortgage. You must have savings. You must have money put away somewhere, living in that tiny apartment of yours." I looked at my mother, feeling a cold stone settle in my stomach. She wasn't asking me to chip in. She was asking me to drain my life savings to cover the cost of her son-in-law's ego. She assumed that because I lived simply I was hoarding cash, and she felt entitled to it. "Mom," I said, pulling my hand away, "are you asking me to pay $18,000 for a dinner where I was forced to sit on a folding chair? Are you asking me to bail out the man who spent the last 2 hours calling me a genetic failure?" Patrice flinched, but she didn't back down. "Don't be dramatic, Brianna. We will pay you back. Preston will write you a check on Monday morning when the bank's open. He just needs a bridge loan right now. Don't let him be humiliated in front of the staff. Think of the family name." "The family name," I repeated, looking at my father. Elijah sat with his head in his hands, completely checked out of the conversation, staring at the brass key on the table. "The family name that Preston just dragged through the mud, calling us laborers and simpletons. I don't have $18,000 on me, Mom," I lied, looking her straight in the eye. "And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to him. This isn't a loan. This is a lesson." Dominique gasped, looking at me with pure disgust. "You are so selfish, Brianna. You are literally the most selfish person I have ever met. You would rather see us go to jail than help out. You are loving this, aren't you? You are loving seeing Preston struggle." "I am not loving it, Dominique," I said, standing up slowly. "I am just refusing to participate in it. There is a difference." Preston's face turned a dark, violent shade of red. He realized I wasn't going to budge. He realized his bullying wasn't working, so he switched tactics. He went from begging to threatening. He buttoned his jacket, trying to regain some shred of dignity, though he looked like a man whose world was collapsing. "Fine," he spat, adjusting his cuffs. "If you won't pay, then you can stay." He looked at Marcus, the waiter who was standing like a statue by the door, watching the scene with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. Waiter Preston barked, My sister-in-law, here has accepted full liability for the bill. She consumed the majority of the expensive items. Anyway, my wife and I and her parents are leaving. She will settle the tab with you. He turned to my mother and Dominique. Let's go. The car is waiting. We are not staying here another minute to be insulted by this ungrateful girl. My mother stood up looking torn, but ultimately she chose the side. She always chose the side of the loud man with the fake gold. Elijah, come on, she urged, pulling at my father's sleeve. We are leaving. Brianna is going to handle it. My father looked up, confusion clouding his eyes. Leaving? But we haven't paid. The police. Brianna is paying, Dad. Dominique lied, grabbing his other arm, pushing him toward the door. She wants to treat us. It is her gift to you. Now come on before the paparazzi show up. They were actually doing it. They were actually going to dine and dash, leaving me as the collateral. They were going to walk out of the Azure Summit, get into their limousine, and leave me to face the police, the management, and the $18,000 debt. They believed that, because I was family, I would eventually cave. I would eventually pull out a credit card to save myself, and by extension save them. Preston walked past me, stopping just inches from my face. His breath smelled of expensive wine and fear. You wanted to be a big shot, Brianna, he whispered, so only I could hear. You wanted to sit at the big table. Well, now you have the bill to prove it. Enjoy washing dishes for the next 5 years. Maybe that will teach you some respect. He pushed past me, heading for the exit. His head held high in a pantomime of confidence. Dominique and my mother dragged my father behind him, looking back at me with a mix of guilt and relief. I stood alone by the table, the folding chair looking pathetic and empty. Beside the velvet ones, Marcus, the waiter, took a step toward me, looking concerned. Ma'am, he said softly, I cannot let them leave. If payment hasn't been rendered, security is already on their way. I held up a hand, silencing him. Let them go to the lobby, Marcus, I said, my voice calm and authoritative, louder than I had spoken all night. Let them get exactly as far as the revolving door. I want them to see the exit. I want them to think they have escaped, and then I want Mr. Henderson to stop them. Marcus looked at me confused for a second before remembering who I was. A small smile touched his lips. Understood. I watched my family retreat down the long hallway. Their footsteps hurried and desperate. They thought they were leaving me behind in the wreckage of their excess. They didn't realize that they weren't walking toward freedom. They were walking into a trap that had been set the moment Preston blocked me from entering my own building. And the woman they left behind to wash dishes was about to be the one giving the orders. I picked up the heavy leather bill folder and followed them slowly, giving them a head start. The scapegoat was done carrying their sins. It was time for the shepherd to cull the herd. The walk from the private dining room to the main lobby was a distance of perhaps 50 yards. But for my family, it must have felt like a runway to freedom. They moved with a hurried, frantic energy that betrayed their attempt to look dignified. Preston led the charge, his head down, his shoulders hunched slightly, as if expecting a blow from behind. He wasn't walking like a CEO anymore. He was walking like a thief, clutching his lapels, trying to make himself small enough to slip through the cracks of consequence. My mother. Patrice trotted beside him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, dragging my confused father along like a piece of luggage. Dominique brought up the rear, constantly checking over her shoulder, terrified that I might be following them, demanding money, or perhaps terrified that the reality of the situation was finally catching up to her. I did follow them, but not with desperation. I followed them with the slow, measured pace of an executioner walking to the scaffold. I held the leather bill folder in my hand, tapping it rhythmically. Against my thigh, I wanted to give them hope. I wanted them to see the revolving brass doors of the entrance. I wanted them to feel the draft of the cold Chicago air hitting their faces, promising escape. And then I wanted to watch that hope shatter against the wall of absolute authority that I had put in place. Preston reached the lobby first. He saw the exit. The path was clear. Or so he thought. He sped up, reaching for the door handle, a smile of relief breaking across his sweaty face. He thought he had made it. He thought he could stick me with an $18,000 debt and vanish into the night to fight another day. But just as his hand touched the cold brass of the door frame, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was not just a security guard. It was Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the Azure Summit. Henderson was a man of imposing stature, 6 feet 4 inches of immaculately tailored intimidation. He had served in the Royal Marines before entering hospitality, and he carried himself with a quiet, lethal grace that no amount of screaming could rattle. He stepped directly into Preston's path, his movement smooth and final, blocking the exit completely. Flanking him were 4 members of the hotel's security team, large men with earpieces and crossed arms, forming a human barricade that not even a tank could breach easily. Preston slammed into the sudden obstruction, almost losing his balance. "Move!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Do you know who I am? Get out of my way this instant! I am a VIP guest!" Mr. Henderson did not move. He did not blink. He simply looked down at Preston with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were observing a particularly noisy insect. "Good evening, sir," Henderson said, his voice a low rumble that carried across the silent lobby. "I trust you enjoyed your meal. However, I have been informed by your server, Marcus, that there is an outstanding balance of $18,500.42. We cannot allow you to exit the premises until this matter is settled." Preston recoiled as if he had been slapped. "Settled? It is settled. My sister-in-law is back there. She is paying. She accepted the liability. Let me pass, or I will call the police myself." Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. "I am afraid that is not how it works, sir. The reservation was made in your name. The wine was ordered by you, and the attempted payment method, which was declined for insufficient funds, was yours. Therefore, the liability remains with you. Now, if you could please step over to the front desk, we can discuss alternative payment arrangements. Perhaps a wire transfer or a lien on personal assets." The words "insufficient funds" echoed through the lobby, which was filled with guests checking in and out. People stopped to watch. The illusion of Preston, the tycoon, was evaporating in real time, leaving behind only a desperate broke man in a cheap suit. "Don't you dare speak to me about assets!" Preston screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple, saliva flying from his lips. "You are making a huge mistake. Do you have any idea who I am connected to? I am a personal friend of the owner of this hotel. I am close personal friends with BJ. My mother, Patrice." Seeing the security guard, stepped forward, trying to use her influence. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice trembling but haughty. "My son-in-law is telling the truth. He is in business with Helix Holdings. He is going to be a partner next week. If you don't let us leave, he will call BJ and have you all fired. Do you want to lose your job over a misunderstanding?" Mr. Henderson's eyes flickered to my mother, then back to Preston. He tilted his head slightly, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. "You know BJ?" he asked, his tone polite, but laced with steel. "Yes," Preston shouted, seizing on the opening, thinking he had found a weakness. "I know BJ. We are like family. We talk every day. I was just on the phone with him. He told me to put this dinner on his tab. He will be furious when he hears how you are treating me. I will sue this hotel into the ground. I will sue you personally. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Now get out of my way before I make that call." I had reached the edge of the lobby, by now standing quietly near a large potted fern leaning against a marble pillar. I watched the performance with a dark satisfaction. Preston was doubling down. He was tripling down. He was building a fortress out of lies, and he was standing on the highest tower, daring gravity to pull him down. Mr. Henderson looked at Preston for a long, silent moment. He didn't look angry. He looked almost sad. He looked like a teacher watching a student fail a test they had cheated on. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small walkie-talkie, holding it loosely in his hand. "That is very strange," Sir Henderson said softly, his voice carrying a dangerous weight. "You say you speak to BJ every day. You say you are close friends. You say BJ is a man who smokes cigars and stays at lodges in Aspen." "Exactly," Preston lied, puffing out his chest. "He is my mentor." Mr. Henderson let out a short, dry chuckle. It was a sound devoid of humor. "It is strange," Henderson continued, "because in the 10 years I have worked for Helix Holdings, I have never known the chairman to smoke cigars, and I have certainly never known the chairman to be a man." Preston froze, the color drained from his face. "What are you talking about? Of course he is a man. BJ. Benjamin." Mr. Henderson took a step forward, closing the distance between them, looming over Preston with terrifying authority. "BJ does not stand for Benjamin, sir. And the owner of this hotel is not in Aspen. The owner is currently in the building. In fact, the owner has been observing your behavior all evening." Preston looked around frantically, his eyes darting to the elevators to the concierge desk, searching for this mythical, powerful man he had invented. "Where is he?" "Bring him here. I will talk to him, man to man. He will vouch for me." My mother grabbed Preston's arm, looking terrified. "Preston, what is he talking about? Who is the owner?" Mr. Henderson's gaze shifted. He looked past Preston, past my mother, past Dominique, who was cowering behind her husband, trying to hide her face. He looked directly at me, standing in the shadows, with the bill folder in my hand. He slowly raised his hand, palm open, gesturing toward me with the reverence one would show to royalty. "You say you know BJ?" "Sir," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper that screamed across the room, "you say you are best friends. That is fascinating because BJ stands for Brianna Jones. And she is standing right there holding the bill you tried to run away from." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world ending. It was the silence of an entire reality collapsing in on itself. Preston turned around slowly, his neck moving with the stiffness of a rusty machine. He looked at me. He looked at the folding chair. Girl, the failure, the disappointment. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a victim. He saw the guillotine, and the blade was falling. The silence that descended upon the lobby of the Azure Summit was heavy enough to crush bone. It was the kind of silence that happens when the laws of physics suddenly change and gravity pulls in a different direction. Preston stood frozen, his hand still half raised in a gesture of accusation, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream that would not come out. He looked from Mr. Henderson to me, and then back to Henderson, his brain trying to process the impossible equation that had just been presented to him. "B. J." He whispered, his voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "BJ is—" You, Mr. Henderson did not answer him. Instead, the large, imposing man who terrified grown men with a single look turned his back on Preston. He pivoted with military precision and faced me. Then, in front of the bellhops, the concierge, the security team, and the gathering crowd of Whisper guests. Mr. Henderson bowed. It was not a mocking bow. It was a deep, respectful inclination of the head, the kind reserved for heads of state, or in this case, the owner of the building. "Good evening. Madam Chairman Jones Henderson," said his voice clear and deferential. "I apologize for the disturbance regarding these non-paying guests. We were waiting for your signal before removing them. How do you wish to proceed?" I stepped away from the marble pillar I had been leaning against. As I moved, I felt a physical shift in my body. The slouch I had adopted for 30 years to make my family comfortable disappeared. The hesitation I usually felt when speaking to my mother evaporated. I walked toward them, not as Brianna, the disappointing daughter, but as Brianna Jones, the founder and CEO of Helix Holdings. The sound of my loafers on the marble floor echoed like gunshots. I walked right up to Preston. He was shrinking, literally shrinking into himself. His expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume, his posture collapsing under the weight of the realization. He looked at me with eyes full of terror because he was replaying every single thing he had said to me in the last 3 hours. He was remembering the folding chair. He was remembering the insults about my genetics. He was remembering calling me a leech. And worst of all, he was remembering the lies he had told about his best friend, BJ. "Hello, Preston," I said, my voice calm, smooth, and terrifyingly polite. "You wanted to meet BJ. You wanted to look him in the eye and finalize your deal? Well, here I am." Preston made a sound like a strangling cat. Brianna, this is a joke, right? You are playing a prank. You paid this guy to act like you are the boss. This isn't real. You take the bus. I didn't dignify that with an answer. Instead, I held out my hand to Mr. Henderson. Without a word, he placed a thick blue folder into my palm. It was the file Preston had sent to my office 2 weeks ago, the file he thought was sitting on a mahogany desk in Aspen. It was the due diligence report for Vantage Crypto. I opened the folder slowly, letting them see the documents inside. I saw my mother Patrice peering over Preston's shoulder, her face pale, her hands clutching the fake Rolex as if it were a rosary. "I have reviewed your application for a Series B investment." "Preston," I said, flipping through the pages. "The $2 million you requested to scale your operations." I paused, looking up at him. Seeing as I am the chairman of the investment committee, I decided to deliver the verdict personally. Preston's eyes lit up with a tiny flicker of pathetic hope. He thought maybe, just maybe because we were family, I would show mercy. He thought he could charm his way out of the grave he had dug. "Brianna, look, I know I said some things tonight," he stammered, sweat dripping off his nose onto the marble. "But it was just stress. You know how it is. Business is business. If you are really BJ, then you know the potential. We can keep this in the family. We can make millions together." I stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then I reached into the folder and pulled out the executive summary, the page with his signature on it. "Business is indeed business, Preston. And my business does not partner with liabilities." I took the paper in both hands and ripped it down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper was loud, sharp, and final. I tore it again and again, reducing his $2 million dream to confetti. "Your application is denied," I said, dropping the pieces onto the floor at his feet. "Reason for rejection. Number 1. Financial fraud. Your user numbers are inflated by 40%. As I tried to tell you at dinner. Number 2. Insolvency. You are currently operating with a negative cash flow that you are hiding with creative accounting. And number 3. Character." I took a step closer to him, invading his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. "We have a strict morality clause at Helix Holdings. We do not do business with racists. We do not do business with liars. And we certainly do not do business with men who try to dine and dash on their father-in-law's birthday while leaving the bill for a woman they consider beneath them." Preston looked down at the shredded paper, his knees shaking so hard I thought he might collapse. He looked at Dominique for help, but my sister was staring at me as if I were an alien. She looked at my simple blazer and my sensible shoes, and she finally realized that while she was playing rich, I was actually rich. "But wait," Dominique whispered, her voice cracking. "Brianna, if you own this place, if you are Beej, why did you let us treat you like that? Why did you sit on the folding chair?" I turned to my sister, looking her up and down, taking in the sequined dress, and the fear behind her eyes. "Because I wanted to give you a chance. Dominique, I wanted to see if there was any part of you that was still my sister, or if you were just Preston's accessory. I gave you 3 hours to stand up for me. I gave you 3 hours to show Dad some respect. You failed every test." I turned back to Mr. Henderson, pointing at Preston. "Mr. Henderson, please update the security database, effective immediately." Preston Vantage is banned for life from the Azure Summit and all affiliated Helix properties worldwide. If he steps foot on the premises again, you are to have him arrested for trespassing. Understood, Madam Chairman Henderson said, motioning for his guards to step forward. Preston panicked. No, you can't do that. Brianna, please, my reputation. If word gets out that I was rejected by Helix, I am ruined. Nobody in Chicago will. Touch me. That is the point, Preston, I said coldly. You built your reputation on my name without my permission. Now I am taking my name back. I turned finally to my mother, Patrice. She was standing there, trembling, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked from the security guards to the luxury lobby, and then at me. She didn't look proud. She looked terrified because she realized she had bet on the wrong horse. She had spent 30 years criticizing me and worshipping Preston, and in one night the hierarchy had been flipped upside down. Brianna? She sobbed, reaching out a hand toward me. Please, this is a misunderstanding. We are family. We can talk about this. Don't do this to your brother-in-law. It destroys us. I looked at her hand reaching for me, the same hand that had slapped my father's hand away from the velvet chair, the same hand that wore the heavy gold watch. I looked at the watch on her wrist, staring at the jerking, ticking second hand. You made your choice, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, so only she could hear. You chose the glitter. You chose the noise. You let him humiliate Dad and you laughed. You let him humiliate me and you joined in because you thought he was the golden ticket. I pointed at her wrist. Take a good look at that watch, Mom. Really look at it. It ticks instead of sweeping. The gold is plating over cheap steel. It is a fake. Just like Preston. Just like the life you thought you were living. I straightened up, adjusting my jacket, signaling to the security team that I was done. The Rolex is a counterfeit, Mom, but my signature on his rejection letter, my ownership of this building, my power, that is real. That is the only real thing you have seen all night. I nodded to Mr. Henderson. Get them out of my sight. As the security guards moved in, grabbing Preston by the arms as he screamed and dragging him toward the door, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happiness. I felt a cold, clean sense of balance. The scales had finally tipped, and as I watched my mother stumble after them crying, not for me, but for her lost status, I turned away, ready to find the only person in that lobby who actually mattered. The arrival of the Chicago Police Department was not subtle, and for once I was grateful for a spectacle. 2 uniformed officers marched into the lobby of the Azure Summit, their presence cutting through the murmurs of the high society crowd like a hot knife through butter. Mr. Henderson had not called them for a simple unpaid bill. He had called them for credit fraud, identity theft, and passing counterfeit currency crimes that carried a much heavier weight than a dine and dash. I stood back and watched as the officers approached Preston, who was currently being held up by 2 security guards because his legs had apparently decided to resign from their duties, much like his dignity. Officer Miller, a stern woman with no patience for nonsense, read him his rights while he sobbed. The man who had spent the last 3 hours lecturing my father on what it means to be a man was now crying, calling for his mother and blaming the banking system for a conspiracy that existed only in his head. When the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed off the marble walls, sweeter than any symphony I had ever heard. Preston, Vantage the self-proclaimed crypto king and visionary, was marched toward the revolving doors. His head hung low, trying to hide his face from the iPhones that were inevitably recording his downfall for the morning news. But as the police car lights flashed red and blue through the glass, casting a chaotic strobe effect over the lobby, the real drama was just beginning. My mother, Patrice, and my sister, Dominique, stood frozen near the concierge desk, looking like survivors of a shipwreck who had just washed up on a hostile shore. They watched Preston being shoved into the back of the squad car, and then slowly, terrifyingly, they turned their eyes to me. The realization hit them in waves. They were not just losing their golden boy, they were losing their safety net, their status, and their ride home. They looked at me standing there in my blazer, the owner of the building, the woman holding all the cards, and the panic set in. Patrice moved first. Her heels clicked rapidly on the floor as she rushed toward me, her hands outstretched, forgetting that 10 minutes ago she had practically disowned me. Brianna. She gasped, her voice shrill with desperation. You have to stop them. You have the power. You can tell the police it was a mistake. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can't let them take Preston. He is family. I looked at my mother, looking for even a speck of genuine concern for me in her eyes. I found none. It was all fear. Fear of scandal, fear of poverty, fear of losing the illusion she had crafted so carefully. I took a step back, letting her hands grasp at empty air. I cannot stop the law. Mom, I said calmly. Preston committed fraud. He tried to pay with a fake card. He falsified loan documents. Those are choices he made. I am not a judge, I am just the victim he tried to stick with the bill. Dominique joined the fray, tears streaming down her face, ruining her contour. Brianna, please, she wailed, grabbing my sleeve. You don't understand. If he goes to jail, they will seize everything. The car, the condo, my accounts. Everything is in his name. We will be homeless. You can't do this to us. We are your flesh and blood. I looked at my sister, the girl who had laughed when I was given a folding chair, the girl who had called me jealous because I took the bus. Flesh and blood, I repeated quietly. You didn't seem to care about flesh and blood when you were eating Wagyu beef while Dad stared at an empty plate. You didn't care about family when you tried to leave me with an $18,000 debt. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm, pushing her back toward our mother. I am not doing this to you, Dominique. You did this to yourselves. You bet on a liar because he looked shiny, and now the shine has rubbed off. I turned away from them, breaking the gravitational pull of their toxicity for the last time. My eyes scanned the lobby until they found the one person who had been silent through the entire ordeal. My father, Elijah. He was standing near the potted fern where I had left him. He looked older under the harsh lobby lights. His shoulders slumped in the ill-fitting suit he had worn to honor a man who despised him. He wasn't looking at the police car. He was looking at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. I walked over to him, ignoring my mother's screams of Brianna, come back here. I walked until I was standing right in front of him, blocking out the rest of the world. Dad, I said softly. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, swimming with a mixture of shame and sorrow. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the mailman who was afraid of his wife. I saw the father who used to sneak me candy when Mom said no. I saw the man who had taught me how to ride a bike before he got too tired from working. Overtime, Dad. I repeated, my voice steady and clear. The police are taking Preston. Mom and Dominique are going to spend the night at the station trying to bail him out. I gestured toward the glass doors, where my personal driver was pulling my Rolls-Royce Phantom up to the curb, the Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament catching the light. My car is outside, Dad. It is warm. It has heated seats, and it is going straight to 43rd Street. To the wood shop, I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. You have a choice, Elijah. You can go with them. You can get in a taxi, chase after the squad car, and spend the rest of your retirement listening to Mom scream about how unfair life is. You can go back to being the prop in their stage play. I reached out and took his hand, his rough, calloused hand that felt like home. Or you can come with me. You can come to your shop. You can turn on the lights, smell the cedar, and build something real. You can be my dad again. Full time. No more folding chairs. No more insults. Just us. The lobby was silent, everyone watching the final act of this tragedy. My mother Patrice stood by the door watching us, her mouth open, ready to shout a command, ready to order him to heal like she had done for 40 years. "Elijah, get over here," she barked, her voice echoing off the walls. "Don't you dare walk away from me. We have a crisis. We need to call the lawyer. Get over here now." My father looked at her. He looked at the woman who had taken his paycheck for decades, who had belittled his career, who had stripped the watch off his wrist because it looked better on hers. Then he looked down at his wrist, at the fake gold Rolex ticking jerkily against his skin. Tick, tick, tick. The symbol of everything he had traded his dignity for. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah raised his hand. He undid the clasp. The watch came loose, sliding into his palm. He held it for a moment, weighing it, looking at the cheap gold plating that was already starting to flake near the links. "Elijah, what are you doing?" my mother shrieked. My father didn't answer. He simply turned his hand over and let the watch fall. It hit the marble floor with a loud crack. The crystal face shattered, sending shards of glass skittering across the lobby. The back popped off, revealing the cheap plastic battery compartment inside. It lay there broken and exposed, a piece of trash that had masqueraded as treasure. My father stepped over the broken watch. He didn't look down at it. He looked at me, and a small, tentative smile broke through the sadness on his face. "I am sorry it took me so long. Brianna," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry. I was quiet when I should have roared." "It is okay, Dad." I squeezed his hand. "We have time now." "We have plenty of time." He nodded, straightening his spine. The slump in his shoulders disappeared. He looked taller suddenly. He turned his back on Patrice, who was now staring at the broken watch in horror, realizing that her control had shattered along with the glass. "Let's go, daughter." Elijah said, his voice strong. "Let's go build something." We walked toward the revolving doors, arm in arm. Mr. Henderson signaled the doorman and the glass began to spin. My mother shouted my name one last time, a desperate wail that sounded like a ghost fading into the distance. But I didn't turn around. I didn't look back at the chaos, the police lights, or the family I was leaving behind. We stepped out into the cold Chicago night, but I didn't feel the chill. My driver opened the door of the Phantom, and the warm orange glow of the interior welcomed us. As I settled into the leather seat next to my father, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the old brass key, rubbing it with his thumb like a talisman. The car pulled away, leaving the Azure Summit behind, fading into the rearview mirror, along with the toxic expectations of a lifetime. I looked at my father, and he looked at me. And for the first time in 32 years, we were both exactly where we belonged. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stands by you when the bill comes due. It is about who offers you a seat at the table when the world wants you to stand. And sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from the people who only love you when you are useful. Thank you for watching my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save your own peace, let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that dignity is worth more than gold. And remember, your true worth is never determined by the price of your watch, but by the strength of your character. I am Brianna Jones, and I will see you in the next video. This story reminds us that true power never needs to shout. While Preston tried to purchase respect with counterfeit luxury and loud arrogance, Brianna commanded it through quiet dignity and authentic success. We often mistake noise for competence and flashy displays for wealth, but the most valuable assets in life, integrity, loyalty, and peace, cannot be bought on credit. Elijah's final choice teaches us that it is far better to rebuild your life with a rusty key and a full heart than to remain a prisoner in a golden cage built on lies. Your worth is defined by your character, not their validation. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice is always served cold.